Today, we are talking language, which is a very important subject. Let me try and share my screen. It's just a few slides that will try to make a point here. Please forgive me as I do this for just a few seconds. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I thought maybe let me stick to simple definitions. What is language? So language is a system of communication using sounds or gestures that are put together in a meaningful way according to a set of rules. So I know this is a very simplistic definition, but for this webinar, this is what we are going to stick to. And what is the fourth industrial revolution? So as you can see, we have 3 revolutions before we got to the fourth. So the first one was about mechanization, about steam and water power. The second one was about mass production and electricity. The third one was about electronics, IT systems, and automation. And right now, the revolution is about cyber physical systems. Now, when it comes to language, there are quite a number of schools of thought. And these schools of thought have a different approach of how language influences thought. And the study of how language influences thought has a history in a variety of fields. And these schools of thought are divided in terms of whether or not language influences thought. For instance, one such body is the Sapih Hypothesis. The Sapih Hypothesis has got its roots from linguistics. And the Sapih Hypothesis has a strong, and they also have a weak version. The strong version being linguistic determinism, which states that without language, there can be no thought. And then the weak being linguistic relativism, which states that there are influences from language on thought. And then you have the Sapih Hypothesis standing aloof, arguing that the grammatical structure of a mother language influences the way we see the world. And then Noam Chomsky comes up, and Chomsky says, well, let's consider language as an aspect of cognition, but there are a number of cognitive systems. Piaget, on the other side, with his theory of cognitive determinism, believes that language in the integration of experience is progressive, and it moves from one level to the next. Vygotsky argues that individual and social development stems from a dialectical interaction, function utilization. Now, the question is, how is language a hindrance in the vertical conceptual migration when we grow from one level to the next in terms of understanding of concept? How is language a hindrance? And also, when it comes to the horizontal contextual migration, how is language a hindrance when we try to make our understanding relevant? What is the role of language in the fourth industrial revolution? Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Mawela to help us begin this conversation, and we hope this conversation does not end here. Dr. Mawela, welcome, and over to you.
Sapih, please stop sharing your screen. Dr. Mawela, you are currently muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I was saying thank you, Mr. Majake, for the introduction and to the whole academy for inviting me to come and share my thoughts with you on this important issue. The 4 industrial revolutions that have been so well explained by Mr. Majake were innovations, in my opinion, that were created or designed to make life easier for mankind. And that they achieved. Life became easier, and of course, the quality of life was also compromised in some ways. And so they have done their part, but I'm not going to waste your time talking about the achievements or lack thereof of the 4 industrial revolutions. Firstly, because that's not my area of specialty. I'm sure the academy can deal with that, and many other people who are attending this forum would know better. I'm just going to position myself in my space as a language practitioner, because that is what I can talk about. So I'm not going to waste your time, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that all the revolutions, the industrial revolutions, have achieved a lot of good for mankind. They show that we are evolving and we are getting better and better, even though there have been some other issues that have come up because of the very improvements that these industrial revolutions were giving. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you very much. And just a few slides that we'll be looking at as we continue. The one thing that is it now visible?
Yes, but can you perhaps project it to, or change it to view slide? Thank you.
Is this okay?
Yes, that's perfect, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. All right. I would like to position myself here and say, for me, I'm going to switch off my thing so that you hear me better for bandwidth and so on. For me, these innovations, these 4 revolutions that we've gone through were coined and expressed through the medium of language. Language has already been defined by the host. However, I've got other definitions that I would like to add to that, which just, actually they are not different. They just strengthen what has already been placed there. But I do want to say, as we continue with this discussion, my position is that language is key to the Industrial Revolution. Without language, the 4th Industrial Revolution cannot be expressed, cannot be discussed. With that in mind, let's let's look at a few more definitions of language. One of them is the system of words or signs that people use to express thoughts and feelings to each other. Another definition says it is a systematic means of communicating ideas or feelings by the use of conventionalized signs, sounds, gestures, or marks having understood meanings. The other one says language is a communication tool through which concepts are conceived, meaning negotiated, and knowledge conveyed from one individual to another. You can tell from these definitions that they tally with what Mr. Majake has already mentioned. And yes, I agree that for the purposes of our discussion, it is better for us to look at where we are talking about meaning making, where meaning is negotiated, where knowledge is conveyed, and where concepts are conceived. That would be our working definition. And what is the importance of language? Dawkins states mathematics education begins in language. It advances and stumbles because of language, and its outcomes are often assessed in language. This statement that he has made is true of other learning areas as well. Educators who teach content subjects such as maths, like in his case, and science and life orientation and all that, they find themselves teaching the concepts that they are supposed to teach, as well as the language. In most cases, the language that they use is English, spoken by approximately 9% of the population in South Africa. So you find that the educator and the learners are not native speakers of English, and they struggle to find one another in the foreign space. Research indicates that one of the causes for low pass rate when it comes to basic education, mathematics, life sciences, physical sciences, and the list goes on and on, one of the major causes of low pass rate is poor language skills, which means even if the learners could have mastered the concepts, but because they are not able to express or to understand the language of instruction, then they struggle with those concepts that they're supposed to be mastering. Let us look at the literacy crisis in South Africa. I cannot speak about language and not confine myself to the crisis that we are dealing with in our country. The fourth industrial revolution lands at a time when the education system of South Africa is bogged down by a plethora of challenges for higher education and for basic education. For higher education or the institutions of higher learning, it lends or it comes at a time when the issues of access into universities is the item on the agenda. There is progress, of course, when it comes to epistemological access to institutions of higher learning, because there is financial assistance that is being provided by the Department of Higher Education in the form of NSFAS and all such structures. However, there is still a struggle when it comes to the ontological access to institutions of higher learning. This is because of inflexible structures that were put in place during the colonial era and later during the apartheid era. To break down those structures and come up with new user-friendly structures is a mammoth task. As a result, a large number of students enroll at these institutions of higher learning at the beginning of every year. They enroll for study, but very few of them actually graduate. For basic education, the fourth industrial revolution finds us still struggling to read and write. It is not a secret that the Department of Basic Education has embarked over the years on several diagnostic tests that have continuously placed the learners in South African schools at the bottom of the literacy rank. You talk of the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Education Quality. We participated in SACMEC 2 and SACMEC 3. The Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, PEARLS. We participated in PEARLS 2006, 2011, 2016. You talk of the annual national assessments that were administered from 2011 to 2014. All these diagnostic tests bring but the same results. They spell out doom to our learners. And there is an analogy or rather an experience that I had when I was a student, which is some centuries ago, of course, where at the end of the school year, the teacher would, or rather the principal of the school that was in primary, would announce the results for each class, and you would all stand. If you are called, you come and stand, you are number one, you're number two. They would call all of us up to the very last one. And so the challenge, of course, for those who were intelligent, they would come up in the top 10, top 3, top 5. They enjoyed such activities. However, some of us did not really enjoy this because you would find yourself being, if there's a class of 70 learners, you would be number 69 or number 68. And it was not very exciting to be called at that point. There was an expression used, especially among the Shona-speaking people, for the ones who would be right at the tail, would call you the tail, umsila in Zulu, but in Shona would say, you are the one who closes the door, mvara door. And you'd be laughed at throughout. As we are walking home from school, we would all be laughing at you because you are the one who closes the door, mvara door. Now this has become, that old experience has become real today, because when we meet with people of other countries and sit around the tables when discuss literacy, we as South Africans become the mvarador. We're always the ones with the lowest. We participate with 50 countries, 70 countries, 20-something countries, and we're always sure to be the ones who shut the door at the bottom of the literacy rank. And so I'd like us to understand that as we embark on this agenda of the fourth industrial revolution, we are talking at the time when there are challenges in higher education and there are challenges in basic education. These diagnostics tests, I've not broken down what results they give. I don't think it's necessary for us to get into those details, but the average, they always, sometimes they say 78%, sometimes they say 60-something%, but the average is around 75% of learners in South African schools struggle to read for meaning. That means they may be able to decode, they may be able to identify the letters of the alphabet. However, they do not understand, they cannot comprehend what they're reading. And another sad thing that has been revealed by these diagnostic tests is that the 75% of learners in South African schools who struggle to read and write are those who come from the working class homes. Those whose environments are not conducive to their literacy development. Now, let's look at what neuroscience has to say about this challenge. There is Dahin. He's a cognitive neuroscientist, and he explains the brain activity, all right, when a child learns to read. He says the children's brains are well-developed networks for vision and speech. They do not necessarily have a problem when it comes to vision and speech. But then, before I get into those details, let's just look at a simple structure of the functions of the brain. Here is a child, every child, when a child is oriented into the family or into the community, there are these three functions. The first, let me say, these three boxes. The first box, this is where the brain of the child is shaped by the environment that he finds himself in and the experiences he goes through. The second box, this is where the child uses those experiences that he has been exposed to and compares them or contrasts them, or compares and contrasts them with new information that comes his way. And then the third function is where the patterns, there are certain patterns used to make meaning. Now, what am I saying here? Let's look at child A and child B. We have child A's name is Ntabiseng. Ntabiseng comes from a middle-class home where there is literacy surrounding her. There are books, there are stories read, there's this and that. Everyone in the family holds a book and reads. And so little Ntabiseng is exposed to the concept or the idea of reading and writing way before she can read or even learn how to read. And so she starts reading from an early age, like through eating the books. You normally see toddlers in the home chewing the books, or whenever you are writing or marking as a parent, the child wants to fight and grab that pen. That is a form of socialization for that child. That child already starts knowing that there's something that is a paper and that there is some use of this thing. So when that child goes to school and finds a teacher, that is the foundation phase, and finds a teacher who uses a similar thing, a book, a paper, a pen, a pencil, this child's world, or the child compares this with what he or she has already seen at home, and it's like, oh yeah, I've seen people holding this. I've seen people using this. That child is okay. And then the patterns are used to make meaning. Oh, and then as she grows older, Ntabiseng gets to understand that, oh, this is for reading. This is for writing. We don't eat these things. We actually use them to write with. We actually read. These black dots are actually letters and stuff like that. But on the other hand, you've got John. John comes from a working class background. John has been oriented, socialized in oral traditions. He knows how to fetch water from the well. He knows how to cut firewood. He knows how to do this and that. He has been well taught. He's got some literacies that he has. He comes with that to school. However, he never saw anybody read and write. When the teacher comes with a pen and a pencil, for John, he can't compare, he contrasts this new information with what has shaped him. And so the patterns are, if John is successful at school, he is going to have another pattern built in his brain that says, at school we do this, but at home we do differently. However, for Ntabiseng, they do similar things. And so for her, literacy is not a huge problem. But for this one, it is for John, it is a huge problem because he has to now build, his brain has now built new patterns to make meaning. Now, let me come to a more scientific. I was just giving you a general explanation of this, but let me come to a more scientific explanation. The children's brains have well-developed networks of vision and speech. You see that highlighted by the blue section on the slide. However, the brain must be explicitly taught to attend to the individual phonemes of speech and must attribute them to different letters. This happens in the left hemisphere in the visual word formation area, or the brain letter box. That is now the red section of the brain. Now, this letter box is only activated in literate people. Going back to the example I gave a few minutes ago of Ntabiseng and John. Ntabiseng comes with this letterbox activated when she begins schooling because she comes from a middle class background where there is some form of reading and writing. However, John comes with that letterbox, that red section, not activated. So already, as the two children begin school, there are those differences. The lexicon meaning system, that is now the green section of the brain, and the pronunciation articulation, which is the orange section system, are already used for spoken language. Now, both children are okay with spoken language from their homes, but there needs to be a connection created between these networks and the networks for speech, sound, and meaning. In essence, Dehin here is saying, from the brain point of view, that when one learns to read, one must first recognize the letters, then how the letters come together to form words, which is the red section. The second step is to connect those words to the system of speech sound, which is the orange section, and meaning, which is the green section. So learning to speak any language that one is immersed in comes naturally. But learning to read does not come naturally. One has to be explicitly taught how to read. Note that the brain mechanisms that Dehin is describing are the same in all cultures. I'm trying here to explain the reason for the high, or rather for the low literacy rate in our country. It is because of these connections that are missing in many of our learners, the 75%, just for a number, you know. Let me come close. Oriented pedagogies is that they are structured with an assumption that the learner has been exposed to early childhood literacy development. Research shows that the children from middle-class homes are exposed to 1,000 hours of literacy before they enter school. This is where the parents, you know, they read stories to them, they see them reading, the children are immersed in a print-rich environment at home. On the other hand, the children from working class homes are exposed to few or no hours of literacy exposure. When they begin formal schooling, they are taught to read during the first 3 years of school. In the South African context, we call it the foundation phase. This 3-year period may be enough for the children who already had 1,000 hours of exposure prior to schooling. However, these 3 years are not enough for the children who never got exposure before the foundation phase. In addition, these pedagogies do not take into consideration the knowledge that the learners from the oral, non-literate backgrounds come with, because they come with a lot of literacies, a lot of oral literacies to the class. But our teaching structures do not accommodate that. Neither do they consider their experiences as well as their socio-cultural contexts. So the reading and writing lessons become activities detached from the learner's real life situations. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the crisis we have, and it is the situation in which the fourth industrial revolution finds us. As if this is not bad enough, then COVID-19 happened. It worsened everything. It highlighted the social divide in the country. As you remember, that when lockdown happened last year, people shifted from face-to-face teaching to virtual spaces like the one we're on right now. But in the whole continent, that is now the African continent, there were only about 36% of people who had access to internet at the time of the lockdown in March 2020. And there hasn't been much improvement. Yes, there's been improvement here and there. And here in South Africa, as you all remember, for basic education in public schools or in non-fee paying schools, there was no education whatsoever. private schools and those other fee-paying schools moved onto remote platforms, and they continued to some extent. But the majority of our learners, there was no learning taking place. And right now, there's research that we are conducting that shows that there have been learning losses over the year and a half, or more than a year and a half, that we've been in COVID-19. And so what are we saying? We are saying the fourth industrial revolution comes and finds this kind of a situation. So what is the role of language in the fourth industrial revolution? My response to this question, ladies and gentlemen, is language is central to the fourth industrial revolution. Language holds the revolution together because the revolution is imagined, envisaged, and expressed through language. Allow me to pause points for us to ponder upon as we embark on the series of conversations. I know this is just, today is just an introduction to a number of other conversations that will be held on this issue. And I'd like to throw these points at your feet as you think about this. The first point, it is important for us to acknowledge the centrality of language in the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot but be excited about the revolution without focusing on the importance, on the centrality of language. Language holds this revolution together. And if the center does not hold, then things fall apart, as Chinua Achebe said. The second thing you and I need to think about, we need to be mindful of the plethora of challenges faced by the South African education system. These challenges hinder us from transitioning smoothly into the fourth industrial revolution. The third point I'd like us to think about is we need to be willing to embrace the decolonization of language agenda and decentralize English as the language of the fourth industrial revolution by broadening science and technology into the indigenous languages. Whenever you talk of fourth industrial revolution, I don't know much about it, but you only use terms that come in a language that is not indigenous. So we need to be willing to decentralize English. We need to be willing to use, to broaden this by using terms or words, including things that will accommodate. Let me give you an example so that you get my point here. Let's just look at the old computer. A computer is not part of the fourth industrial revolution. I know it came some years ago. I think it falls within the third industrial revolution. However, even today, the spell check in the computer does not accommodate the indigenous languages. My name is Rethabile. And each time I type my name, the computer tells me that I have spelled it wrong. Why? Because the computer cannot speak Sesotho. We need to think seriously about these things. Why shouldn't it? These days we use GPS when we drive around. And I have noted that that woman who speaks 10 right, in 300 meters, 10 left, and so on and so forth, only speaks English. I don't know why she is never taught other languages. We need to create terms in indigenous languages. You talk of Zoom, you talk of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all these things. Let's come up with the vocabulary that can accommodate other languages if we are talking about the fourth industrial language, fourth industrial revolution, and we want to be serious about the centrality of language. As I wind up, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to suggest that the central to the fourth industrial revolution is language. The fourth industrial revolution is coined, envisaged, and expressed through the medium of language. Without language, it is not possible to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. This presentation suggests that we must acknowledge the centrality of language to this industrial revolution. We must be mindful of the many challenges faced by the education system in South Africa, which hinder us from transitioning smoothly into the fourth industrial revolution. And finally, we need to decentralize English as a language of power by promoting the indigenous languages to academic languages. Thank you.
Wow, wow, a mouthful. Dr. Mawela, thank you very much for your thoughts, and thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I think the only request I want to make before my colleague Susan Felsman says anything is that people evaluate this session. I have sent a link through our chat. So please look out for that link and please evaluate our session. Sue, over to you.
Morning, colleagues. Sorry, and it seems that I cannot switch on my video camera. Let me just try again. No, it says that my host is very nasty to me and I cannot switch on my video. So sorry about that. You'll have to listen to this voice.
Just try again, please. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Ina. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much for switching that on. So good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Dr. Mawela. What an interesting discussion indeed. And thank you for relating to this whole situation and challenge we're facing from a very sort of personal, passionate, and interwoven with expert and scientific knowledge. It has been an interesting journey this past hour, etc. Tsepo, I just would like to know, would you like to take questions at this stage, or would you just like me to perhaps just say a few impressions from my side? Is that good?
I think give us your impressions, Sue, so that we then can have questions later, because I know there's a meeting you are going to.
Yes, and I'm so sorry about that. So colleagues and Dr. Mawela, what was very interesting, you know, before the COVID-19 pandemic, my colleagues on this call, we attended a science outreach activity, and my colleague Ina Smith is very good and well versed in the fourth industrial revolution. What does it mean for us as humans, and in schools and in our curriculum, and in choosing careers in going forward? And this girl child learner actually got up at the end of our discussion, and she said, well, it's all good and well, She's been listening now to what we've been saying and what we're sort of advocating for, but what is the role of humans and language in the fourth industrial revolution? So just to say that there are some learners out there, young ones for that matter, I think she was about 17, 18 years old, that's already questioning sort of what is the interaction and the role and the influence on each other. And that really sort of made me also stop and think about it. And I really appreciate your talk, because I think you're spot on, you know, that without language, there's no thought, there's no communication, there's no interpretation, and the meaning and the comprehension is absolutely gone. So although we promote the fourth industrial revolution and all the magnificent things it can bring us, it is highly problematic. We need to get solutions for South Africa by South Africans, and how we actually tackle this problem head on. And I can see, and I mean, not being in the education field and being involved with my many children and with my grandchildren now, the relationship between language and maths education, it never crossed my mind, but as soon as I encountered it, I realized there's a fine line between the two. And when they start and they cannot read properly, I would say to the parents, please send them, read with them. And it did improve even their maths. And thank you for highlighting that very special relationship, because we don't think there are relationships between language and maths education and maths understanding for that matter, and all the maths related sort of subject fields. So that's always quite an eye opener, and I so wish that so many thousands of people have actually listened to you this morning, because I think just for parents, from a parenting point of view, this has been a very important aspect. In all our other webinars that we had one on robotics and coding as well. And I think the big thing expressed during that particular webinar is, again, the literacy crisis we are facing. And now we're trying to teach children how to code and the robotics. And please, colleagues on this line, you know, I'm very much for technology. I'm very technology driven. It's not that I'm against technology, but I just look at our learners and where they come from. It is really most concerning. And you're right, the COVID-19 just made that divide so much bigger. You know, we're looking in our field as well, what impact and influence did it have on schools? It is really, it is dramatic. And again, it is just putting so much pressure on our education system and getting our learners educated, and the literacy crisis, etc. I think for me, my takeaway message again, and we do forget that, is then the importance of reading, is that lead by example. I'm a librarian by profession, by the way, and so I also look at how much people read with their children, for their children. And that's the other problem, is that libraries are a dying breed of people and institutions and buildings. And that is our problem. I mean, go to schools and just have a look and see where there's a library. We still had library periods in my days. You talking about you are centuries old. I think I'm triple centuries more older than you are. And where are the libraries? And yes, so it's a chain of things that have to happen to actually get us on board with the fourth industrial revolution and to cope with technology and whatever it brings about, and to be out there and to be competitive and to be employable with the market as such. So Dr. Mawela, my sincerest appreciation and thanks for this presentation you made this morning. It was really enlightening and really bringing about quite a lot of things home again. In a sense, we consider them as very basic, but they're not. They are the building stones of well-functioning human beings in this world of the fourth industrial revolution. So thank you very much. Tsepo, thank you to you for organizing this, and then over to you, and thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susan. I think now we have a few minutes to take a few questions, and I see Professor Broughton, your hand is up. Is it possible, Ina, that we give him permission to talk?
Hello.
Over to you, Prof.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mawela. That was fascinating. It's Mike Bruton from Cape Town. In my recent writings, I've argued that we're not in the fourth industrial revolution, but in the first post-industrial revolution, and that this revolution is completely different from the first three. And one of the ways it's different is that it's a problem-solving revolution, which will hopefully undo many of the wrongs created by the first three industrial revolutions. Although those first three revolutions were beneficial for humankind, they were very unbeneficial, if there's such a word, for the other inhabitants of the planet. And a great deal of damage has been done to the environment and to life support systems and essential ecological processes. And what we need to, in our thinking about this, we need to recognize that at the same time as this first post-industrial revolution is happening, we also have the Anthropocene extinction, the first human-caused extinction. And this is the most serious crisis that humankind and all the other inhabitants of the planet have faced. And it is an extremely important time for people to work together, to communicate together, and address the problems. It's a far more serious issue in the long term than COVID. And what I've suggested is that something called the information value chain, where it's not enough for people just to have knowledge, well, just to have information. That information needs to be turned into knowledge, that knowledge into wisdom. And unless that wisdom is used by people to change their mindset and change their behavior, then we're not going to be able to solve the problems that are being faced by us in these two crises. Do you have any comments on that?
I fully agree with you, Prof. I fully agree with you. And thanks for pointing out that we are lagging behind. So yeah, I agree with you that we are not quite there yet. But yes, I fully concur with you that, you know.
Yeah, and it seems to me that a very important issue is for languages other than English to be able to articulate the complexity of the problems that we're facing in this post-industrial revolution and in the Anthropocene. And, you know, it's gratifying to hear that translations are taking place for AI and robotics and so on, but is there a campaign throughout Africa to enhance the technical content of languages so people can understand these complex issues better?
Thank you very much, Prof. I think Susan and Ina, we should consider our next webinar with Professor Broughton so that we can be able to take these ideas forward, in particular, the thoughts about the first revolution, this being different from the previous three. Susan, I see your hand.
Sorry, Tsepo, no, I'm good, thank you. You can move on. Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much. Prof, I think you will be next considered for the webinar. Please allow us to do so. Ina, I'm not sure.
I'd be very happy to do that. Thank you.
Would appreciate that very much, sir. I can't see the hands, but I do see that there are hands. But let me go to the Q&A. There's a question from Marshall Nelson. How best can we join hands to better equip our communities for understanding the fourth industrial revolution language. The youth media movement have a process. Oh, okay. I think that was a question, and there is also a solution to that. So I'm wondering if Marshall wants to unmute somewhere and perhaps give us 2 minutes, talk about what he does or what he suggests we do. Mr. Marshall, are you there somewhere? Please unmute. I can see you, but you haven't unmuted.
I'm listening, my leader.
Yes, now we
listening,
can.
my leader. Thanks for that, my leader.
Please go ahead, sir.
I just needed some help, man. We are running a project in Mitchell's Plain where we teach young people about the language of 4IR. We've got 20 3D printers. We've got, we're building drones and stuff. And we're trying to make our young people to understand that the language of 4IR is going to be a career for them one day. And we're looking to see how best we can build partnerships. I did send my website. If there's some other things that you need from us, we are able to share it with you.
Wow, greatly appreciated, Nelson. I think you are practical and you've already started a project. We are happy to link you up with people in our space, because as entities, we know people who are into innovation. We also know people who are into technology. We will use your website to reach you so that we can be able to talk to you about who can be able to assist you in that space. Claudia.
Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir. Claudia, please go ahead and ask your question, please. Is Claudia unmuting somewhere? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, yes, I've unmuted. Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Mawela. I found fascinating yours, and also, if I may say, Sapih, I'm sorry, I don't have your surname directly, but I really enjoyed your introduction as well. So the comments on the languages were particularly good. I'm an ex-language teacher, and I'm working in the 4IR space as well. And one of the things that I'm finding is that accurate use of language. So Dr. Mawela, picking up on what you're saying, is it's the context of the home. And yes, we understand that English is being used dominantly, but what we're finding is that when people are using language, quite often there's no value placed in actually being too literate. You know, there's almost an undermining of reading. You're a bit of a twerp if you read and things like that. So there's not much value placed in that. So we've got to shift that. And it's not only little value seen in reading, but it's also little value in using language correctly. So what I've tried to do now, working with unemployed youth from ages and from Khayelitsha, and I work with Marshall Nelson in Khayelitsha, from Mitchell's Plain, from Philippians, for whom very, very few, in fact, none of them has English as a home language. But what I've been trying to work with them is saying, when you do coding, you know, you can use language sort of as easily and sloppily as you want to, but when you're coding, if you don't use language accurately, you're going to, your artificial intelligence or your little robot is going to fall off the end of the table. So what you've got to do is look at our own languages, whether it's isiXhosa, Sotho, whatever. Are we using our language as accurately and specifically as possible? Are we making meaning, or are we leading to ambiguity and all the rest of it? So we start and recognizing, and because children love gamification, they know they've got to use correct coding. So there's a kind of transference, and there's a beginning of finding and saying, oops, why I actually need to be more accurate. And one of the very first questions that I ask them before we start anything, the very first question, why do we read? And I ask that question, and I ask teachers that question, and I ask lecturers that question. And if people sit down, they start coming up with 2 points, then they end up with 5 points. I did this with Tembisa, in Tembisa, with World Bank and World Vision. These learners who were at grade 11 came up with this astounding range of reasons as to why they read. And then from there, I made them go into why we write. And they suddenly realized the value of why we read and why we write. And then we sent them out into the community to try and check the levels of reading. And we used pearls, Dr. Mawela, and they came back and they were horrified at how little literacy there was with understanding. And they set up clubs, reading clubs in their own communities, because they suddenly, for the first time, appreciated the value. So that link between why we read, why we write, and then the value in coding, because otherwise you're going to have a machine running rampant, and now suddenly realizing the value of the spoken language and the written language. People go rampant because we use language inaccurately. And there is that match. So that's the one point that I'd like to make. And we're working with, and it is astounding. And just to tell you, these are post-matric kids, many who didn't even do maths. We've taken them through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've taken them through Piaget, how people think, because they've got children of their own, for them to understand that. We've taken them through Erickson's levels of development, where children develop trust and mistrust and so forth. So this is because we think that if this is underpinning, these educational foundations are underpinning the fourth industrial revolution, there will be a responsible use of technology. So that's the one main area. And the other one is that pointing out Dr. Mawela, you were showing the brain, but talking about the corpus callosum and the amount of shuttling between the two. And the more you activate the left and the right-hand brain, the more people learn. So we teach them about observation skills, noticing. What do you notice, what's going on around you? And the more you teach them to notice physical things about where people are sitting, the more they start noticing the use of language and how people are making meaning. And symbols, the use of symbols, what different things symbolize, and pointing out that, in fact, our vocabularies, and this is why I support you 100%, Dr. Mawela, the use of other languages, because the more we use other languages and other symbols and other sounds, the more it activates things. I've tried to explain to the learners as well, why is it that so much of the creativity in the fourth industrial revolution actually comes from China, from Asia, and we have 26 letters in our alphabet. The Chinese have a minimum of 3,200. So those children have to master 3,200 characters. So their brains are shuttling like mad. And that is why they are capable of doing this kind of coding. So the more, and we underestimate what the children's brains are capable of doing. So instead of going for the lowest common denominator, we need to extend people, extend them, and don't always make excuses and say it's going to be too difficult. If I look at how those children in Tembisa put overseas folk to shame with the ideas that they came out with, it was just, again, a recognition of that. So I'm sorry, that was a long discussion, but I hope that there were a couple of points there that could be of value in terms of the use of language in the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you.
Perfect, Claudia. Thank you for your comments. Yes, and I'm impressed to hear that you have already started. You are actually coming with the solutions to the problems that we are posing, with the problems that are on the table. Yes, because our children are more into technology than we are, that will be the way to draw them back to the importance of language through technology. So yeah, there is a relationship between the two. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we don't have much time. So I will just take one or two comments, and there are comments in the chat section. So I will not go there because they are not questions and answer, because I think if there were questions, they were going to be in the Q&A. So it is just charts, which means all of us can just read them and go through them. Prof. Bratton?
I don't necessarily agree with the previous speaker that most innovations are coming out of Asia. I've recently published a book through the Human Sciences Research Council called Harambee, The Spirit of Innovation in Africa, in which I document over 600 cases just as examples of extraordinary innovations made by African people, from low to medium to high tech. And, you know, it's one of the best kept secrets, how innovative African people are, and in so many different countries, and solving the problems of their local communities and also contributing to international innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, this was very fruitful. We appreciate that you joined us. Please do find time to evaluate the session. It's very important to us so that we know what to improve going forward. Next week, Friday, we are going to be having another webinar, and that webinar will be on future careers. So if you have time, please join us. Professor Maximus Sefoto will be joining us presenting on future careers. Dr. Mawela, thank you very much. You were awesome as always, and we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to share your ideas with us. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedules, because I know people are busy, and just taking a few minutes to have this conversation, I think, is very important. So we are going to put this video on our website, and also we are going to put it on the repository. So all of you who've joined us, we are going to send you links so that you can go back if there's a need to look at this presentation once again.